Part of the reason why I made this video in the first place is because I like Joe, because I love his wit and laid-back nature. His charisma, charm, aura and wisdom is all part of the reason why it's so easy to be fooled by Proposition Joe, a man who sometimes comes off as a cuddly teddy bear but is far from it, and is actually as vicious as any other gangster. A brilliant scene to demonstrate this is when he meets Sergey to discuss Nicky's issues with Cheese. Joe is jovial, he's joking around with Sergey, allowing him to poke fun at his weight, and engages in small talk. Joe agrees to the deal and Nick thanks him for being straight, and that's when Joe calls him a fool and reminds him that the only reason he's done the honourable thing is because of Sergey, because a partner wants a favour, not because it's the right thing to do. And as we would later discover, this business with Nick is small potatoes for Joe. It's sensible for him to keep the Greeks happy. Nick gets hit by a brick wall here with Joe's sudden change of demeanour, but that is the real Joe coming out. He's not against killing, and for a man to reach his station, he's got to have more bodies on him than a Chinese cemetery. Oh, no doubt. But where others like Avon are more upfront about this, Joe often does a song and dance about diplomacy and civility. In reality, his goals are not honourable. Joe simply did what he thought was best for business and his own selfish interest, so that he wouldn't get arrested and could continue making a profit, and avoiding bodies was part of that. When dropping bodies did become an interest, like when the New York boys were encroaching on Eastside territory, he had no problem having them cadaverous motherfuckers taken out. And he didn't even have his own guys get their hands dirty, rather outsourced this risky business to Marlo and his people. And he specified that it be done in a public way to send a message. Prop Joe's entire game was maximize profits and minimize risk. It's not that he didn't use violence because he cared about potential victims or shielding the public, he just didn't want the cops breathing down his neck. How can Joe talk about the youth of today losing a sense of community and civility when he is literally a drug kingpin? He is the source of practically the whole city's drug supply. Imagine how many lives have been destroyed to fill Joe's substantial pockets. Sure, if he wasn't around, then the Greeks would find somebody else, and Joe's vision was definitely a damn sight better than the likes of Avon or Marlo, but that's beside the point. It is Joe supplying the city's poison. I find it interesting that guys like Joe and Avon are the antagonists of early season, the drug kingpins who the cops try to go after, but in later seasons when Marlo arrives, all of a sudden fans start considering guys like Avon saints because, for example, he allowed Cutty to walk away and gave him money to start a gym. And yes, Avon is light years ahead of the sociopathic Marlo, but one of the byproducts of later generations coming along and being more evil and villainous is that we can end up whitewashing the crimes of earlier characters. For example, how many actually remember that it was Avon's specific instructions for Omar's boy Brandon to be displayed publicly and killed horrifically to send a message? Many Wire fans associate that with Stringer Bell, when it's Avon who gave the order. Similarly, Joe comes off as a force to be reckoned with in earlier seasons. It's only after Marlo comes along he starts looking like a saint, like a big teddy bear. Although, saying that, I do think Joe's evolution throughout the series deserves a closer look. It's interesting that this guy seemed so hardcore in the beginning, telling Omar he'd kill his whole family if he stole from him, threatening Nick and telling him that the only reason he's making a deal is because of Boris. But in season 4 and 5, Joe is all of a sudden a grandfatherly figure who wants peace for all, who gets a gun put to his face by Omar, who wants to bring Marlo in instead of taking him out, and is ultimately outwitted in spite of being such a calculating and sharp man. The old man was slipping, as Sollozzo says about Don Corleone in The Godfather. I think there's two ways of looking at this, aside from the obvious observation that the writers maybe didn't have Joe's personality and story fully mapped out in the beginning and probably decided to do more with him as the seasons went on. It could be that Joe was hardcore in the old days, was absolutely not hesitant to get his hands dirty to reach the top, but he knew that dropping bodies was bad for business, so once he got to where he was, he started to slow down with the violence. But as he did so, and as he began to age, he started to mellow, and that ferocious sharpness that a mob boss must have started to leave him, allowing him to be outsmarted by the likes of his nephew, who he couldn't have dreamed would betray him like he did. Let's not forget, Slim Charles floated the idea of Cheese betraying Joe, but Joe was a sentimental motherfucker who wouldn't pop a cap in Cheese's ass until he was absolutely sure, but by then it was too late. Another way of looking at Joe's character is that he was always soft, in a manner of speaking, and he only put up a hard front. The threats against Omar and Nick, for example, might be things he often says, but maybe he never really went that hard, being a businessman at heart, not a gangster. I think back to his first appearance at the ball game, wearing a three-piece suit and a clipboard to a basketball match, which Avon calls him out on, and Joe replies, "Look the part, be the part, motherfucker." Perhaps we can take this as symbolism regarding Joe, that he plays a part, he plays the hard man, the stone-cold gangster, but really he's putting on an act. He doesn't have it in him to go to the lengths that other kingpins do. His scene where he puts on 3 different fake accents in a row is another testament to this. All he has to do is look the part, but true animals like Marlo can see him for what he is, that he has weaknesses. In Joe's case, maybe that weakness was disappointment in Cheese, the desire to be a mentor, the desire for a son, to pass something on. Whatever it was, Marlo tapped into that weakness and gave Joe an opportunity to make one of the biggest telegraphed blunders in the entire show. To be fair to Joe, he is never depicted, even early on, as a violent man, choosing not to engage with Brother Mouzone directly, pushing the idea of the co-op as early as season 2, seizing on an opportunity for diplomacy with the Barksdales needing strong product. But anyway, going back to the main topic, this slippery trickster nature of Joe isn't necessarily a positive thing, one where he's avoiding violence. In many ways, he's still doing it, he's just not getting his own hands dirty, like when he has Stringer set Omar on Mouzone. That's still violence Joe is involved in, but it's some distance he's created for himself. There's always a level of plausible deniability with Joe, but when the cobwebs are removed, he's usually in the thick of it somewhere. Maybe not lighting the match, but definitely providing the fuel. He turns anyone on anyone so long as he makes a profit along the way. He'd shake a man's hand with his right and have his pocket in the dude's jacket with his left. Joe's sinister nature goes even deeper. The way he dealt with Old-Face Andre was pure evil, one of the most sickening actions committed in the show. Andre comes to him looking for a friend to help him in his time of need, and after robbing him blind for his store and supposedly making a deal, Joe delivers him straight back to Marlo. Even everyone's favourite lieutenant, Slim Charles, gets a black mark here, being the one who delivers Andre back. Where is Joe's supposed honour here? He saw an opportunity to make a quick buck, swallowed up a guy's store, and cozies up to Marlo to get him on the side of the co-op. If word got out that Joe did what he did, it would surely kill his credibility. As brother tells Avon, business is where you are now, but what got you here is your word and your reputation. I've spoken about this scene in more detail in a previous video, but Andre didn't even do anything wrong. He was simply a pawn caught in between larger forces. The reality is, Joe has no honour where it counts. A born schemer, he plays all sides against each other, his mischievous nature known by all by the end of the show, Omar included, and is precisely the reason Marlo refused to spare him, saying he'd be up to mischief in no time. Even when he gets caught out and robbed by Omar, he tells the co-op Omar sold the dope back for 30 on the dollar instead of 20 on the dollar. Joe just can't help himself with the hustle. And everything this man does could have a double intention. You just never know with Joe whether he's being sincere or not. Like the co-op. Sure, it's a great invention, but it still serves him more than anyone else, as he supplies the dope. It reminds me of Lucky Luciano creating the Commission, a similar organization to the co-op, diplomacy and share alike, but he secretly had majority control over it. Joe approaches String and offers him a helping hand with the good dope, but this could also be him gutting the Barksdales from the inside, nullifying them as a competitor. He puts it upon himself to civilize Marlo, but obviously putting Marlo on a leash allows him to use the boy as an attack dog, like with the New York boys. And his mistake with Marlo essentially turned the boy into an untouchable superpower among the dealers. Through his mentorship, he empowered Marlo, the result of which screwed up the whole co-op when Marlo puts the price of the brick up and he becomes a dictator. That wouldn't have been possible without Joe's screw-up.